I think it is possible to outmaneuver, to decapitate the blob. It can be done, but it requires extreme levels of preparation. I don't think it's time to give up hope. It's just that we mustn't be complacent. I'm Allister Heath, and once again I am responding to some of the excellent reader comments on my latest article warning that Britain faces a 75% chance of ending up as a banana republic. We begin this week with a comment from John Gordon Smith. John writes, "Reform's success, I'm afraid, is a pipe dream. They may win an election, but it is highly questionable that they have the experience or the know-how to effect an efficient government. I am, for want of a better alternative, sticking with the Conservatives for better or worse." So thank you, John. I'm not even sure that Reform will win the next election. What I think is it's basically 50-50 whether we end up with either a Reform government or a Reform Tory coalition on the one hand, or a coalition of chaos on the left on the other hand, including all of the left-wing parties. So I think that's 50-50. That's the first point. The second point, which goes to your critique of Reform's current personnel and experience, is that for this government to be a success would require very significant action by Reform. And so in my piece I argue that Reform needs to focus primarily on people and planning, that it needs to hire dozens of cabinet level people, hundreds of new potential MPs, hundreds of members of the House of Lords, then regulators, other appointees, and also recruit thousands of potential councillors. It's a massive human resource task. It's probably the biggest HR challenge ever faced by a British political party. I also think that a Reform or Reform Tory coalition will need to plan very carefully what it does in its first day in office, first 100 days and so on. And that will require pre-writing legislation and game planning a very complex set of issues. So, all to say, I agree that it's a very high-risk strategy, all of this. I think anyone on the right who is feeling complacent is deluded. I think there's a high chance that all of this ends in tears, but there's an outside chance that we do end up with an efficient and competent right-wing government, maybe as early as in 2027. The next question comes from Carl Gibson. Carl says, "I think a more likely scenario is total destruction of the Labour Party, but only after 4 more years of damage. That is a scenario that must be planned for." I agree that the Labour Party is probably going to be even more annihilated than the Conservative Party was last year. The reason for that is simply that there's a lot more easy alternatives. So the Green Party, for example, is now polling almost as well as the Labour Party in the polls. It's perfectly possible, in fact I think it's likely, that the Green Party will soon overtake Labour in the opinion polls. And at the next election you could end up with Reform winning, but the second largest votes being collected by the Green Party. There's also another weird scenario whereby the Liberal Democrats get the second largest numbers of seats, but the Greens have the second largest number of votes. I think what's happening on the left is even more traumatic than what's happening on the right. I think you're seeing the destruction of the Labour Party. The Labour Party used to be able to poll 40+% at general elections. I think it will be under 20% at the next election. I think it's going to no longer be the primary party of the left. I think it's all change on the left, and that will make it much easier for Reform or a Reform Tory coalition to win power after the next election. The next question is from John Dobinson. John writes, "This article is right but likely too optimistic. The blob is fearsome, the tasks facing Reform immense, and the problems so very deeply embedded in legislation, court structures and government that unearthing enough of them fast enough to keep a volatile and impatient electorate on side requires genius and luck. Plus the unexpected like COVID, which the blob will weaponise. Prayers are required." Well, yes, prayers are certainly required, and as I write in my piece, you almost need a miracle to pull this off, but not quite. I think it is possible to outmaneuver, to decapitate the blob, but I think that can only happen if Reform, as I say, recruits hundreds of very good people, at least 30 or 40 cabinet level or senior advisor level people. At the moment they probably have 6 or 7 now, so they need to go from 6 or 7 to maybe 40 or even more over the next year and a half. They need to find very good MPs, they need to find very good members of the House of Lords, they need to find good economists, lawyers, scientists, business people and so on, people to populate the quangos, the regulators, all that kind of stuff, the Bank of England. So you need people, but you also need planning, very detailed planning to outmaneuver the blob, to abolish the sorts of rules that empower it, to wrest control back to politicians, to make sure that ministers can run the civil service. You effectively have to politicise the civil service. You've got to give up on the current structure altogether. You've got to eliminate the quangos and make sure that it's government departments that are actually in charge, and that MPs and their advisors and political appointees are actually in charge. All of that kind of stuff. It can be done, but it requires extreme levels of preparation. You need to be even better prepared than the Trump 2 administration in America. The Trump 1 administration in America was a disaster. The Liz Truss administration in Britain wanted to be radical, but also imploded on contact with reality. You've got to avoid all of that through people and planning. The next comment is from Jack Miller. I totally agree with Allister. However, as a man with a family in his early 30s, there was no way I could afford to wait, and we moved to New Zealand a few months back. It's not just an economic problem, it's a perception problem. Most people in Britain want the least amount of responsibility possible because that's the culture we've created. I love those sacred islands and I will always have a slither of hope, but I can't see a future there and I'm not optimistic. Well, Jack, I'm incredibly sorry you've left, but what's happened to you is happening to many other people. We've seen new figures out this week showing that, in fact, the exodus from the UK is much larger than the official statistics used to claim. Once again, we've had faulty statistics in Britain underestimating the scale of a problem. But we've all been able to notice with our own eyes. We all know people who've left. We all know young people who've gone to New Zealand, Australia, America, Dubai and so on. We all know older people who've done that. And what's changed, I think, is that the vanguard of those leaving are millionaires, investors, graduates and so on. It's no longer people going to retire to Spain, right? In the past, a lot of the people leaving the UK were older people wanting to retire. Now it's younger people wanting to make a better life for themselves. And I think that's a tragedy, and I think this problem is going to grow, is going to intensify, not get better. We're about to see another series of idiotic and destructive tax increases imposed by the government next week in the budget. It's going to get worse and worse and worse, and more people will leave the UK. The next question, or statement rather, is from Deborah Steele. This analysis is a tad despondent and not really understanding the current populist state for the old major parties. I hope that Reform could do this without the tired Conservative Party, but even if they did need Conservative seats, Reform will be the major party, Reform will make mistakes and it will take time. That is true, and I don't actually disagree with most of what Deborah says. My only difference is what she sees on the right is also happening on the left, and we don't know which of those two developments is going to be stronger. Right, so you've got a lot of populism and anger on the right, people turning to Reform, but you've also got a lot of populism and anger on the left. So there's a lot of energy now on the right, much more than I've ever seen in this country, but there's also a huge amount of energy on the left. I'm talking about the Green Party, I'm talking about the rise of sectarian parties, of neo-Corbynites, the rebirth of the SNP in Scotland, all that sort of stuff. And this country is divided roughly 50-50, probably with a bit more on the left than on the right slightly. There's an opinion poll that shows, for example, that Reform and the Tories together are at 49%. If you added in the Arts Unionists, you'd be at 50, so literally 50 right, 50 left. We are a country that's split right down the middle. So therefore, it's unclear which of the two camps will win. That will depend on turnout, on motivation, on organisation, and on division. If the Tories and Reform destroy each other, you could have a left-wing coalition of chaos. If the Green Party annihilates the Labour Party, then you could have a Reform government with a majority of 200 without even the need for the Conservative Party. We don't yet know how this is going to end. The only thing we know is all the old certainties have been destroyed. The final statement is from Ian Hardy. At 18 years old, this sort of article makes me realise that the rest of my days will not be spent enjoying the fruits of my labour, but will be spent in a rapidly collapsing hellhole. I'm so glad I haven't got any grandkids because I hate to think what the country will be like by the time they become adults. Farewell, my wonderful England. Now that is very sad, Ian, and I'm sorry that what I wrote made you feel that way. That wasn't the intention. I was just trying to objectively assess the probabilities of success for the right or success for the left. And I just can't say that I'm especially optimistic, but that doesn't mean that I don't think it can't happen. Right? A 25% chance of success is better and entirely different than a 0% chance of success. And I think we should gamble here. We should hope that progress can actually happen. We've got to hope that the centre-right can organise itself, can prepare, and can actually win the next election. And we can also hope that the next election will come sooner than 2029. I'm hoping 2027. All of this stuff can happen, is just far from guaranteed. So I don't think it's time to give up hope. It's just that we mustn't be complacent. As always, thank you to all our subscribers for your comments. Keep them coming, and we will try and respond to as many of you as possible.